This is the Tyr Maverick, and it promises a foam that makes you faster by increasing your air time between strides. But is this just a marketing gimmick? Or can this shoe actually deliver? And even if it does, do we care? It's time to lace up the Tyr Maverick and take it for a run.
Pick a side to go. Pick a side, yeah. Pick a side to go.
Yo, what's going on? My name is Kofuzi and I'm a non-elite runner who reviews running shoes on YouTube. And today I want to talk about the Tyr Maverick. But before I give you my thoughts on this shoe, I do want to go over some disclosures. This is a pair of shoes that Tyr sent to me for the purpose of review, so I didn't have to pay for these shoes. However, nobody's paying me to make this video or to include their brand in this video, and no one's going to get a chance to preview any of my footage or my thoughts before you guys get a chance to see this video on YouTube. So with that disclosure out of the way, let's talk about the Tyr Maverick, and let's start with the specs. This is a tall shoe, 44 millimeters of stack height in the heel with an 8 millimeter drop, giving us 36 millimeters of stack height in the forefoot. And there is only one component in this midsole, and that is Tyr's new Flight Time midsole foam. It's a super critical foam that is very soft, at least to the Charmin squeeze test. And there is a lot of foam here. We've got a very wide flare of it in the heel, indicating that it's supposed to be pretty stable back here, even if you are heel striking. And then as you go to the forefoot, there is an early rocker that feels aggressive to me. It's very sharp in terms of how quickly the angle shoots up on this shoe. So there is a bit of a taper. Now, protecting all this foam, we've got a very thick layer of rubber. We've kind of got like a dual horseshoe design where we've got a ring around that back heel, and then we have a ring around the forefoot with an island of rubber in the middle. And this rubber and foam pattern here does kind of remind me of the Novablast a little bit with the trampoline pod that they have in the forefoot. And then there is some exposed foam here in the middle with a big channel from the back leading up to that trampoline pod. Moving to the upper, we have a very breathable, very airy, and very comfortable upper. And that comfort is coming from the fact that this is a very anatomically shaped shoe. There is a very wide toe box here with a lot of volume and height in that toe box as well. And a very thin tongue with a light amount of padding in here, just enough to protect you from any pinching pressure that you might get on the laces. As far as fit goes, I went with my usual running shoe size for the Tyr Maverick, and there's just so much room in this shoe that it feels like it's almost a half size too big. I probably could have gone a half size down, but for, I think, how they're intending you to use this shoe, I feel like it being a little bit on the big side for me is probably the intended fit that they're trying to deliver here. And ultimately, it didn't feel like I was in the wrong size. So those of you who are kind of on the bubble, sometimes you size up, you're probably not going to need to size up for this one. Around the heel collar, we've got a very restrained amount of padding, not very much at all. And there isn't a lot of armor in the back here. There is like this rubber scaffolding that goes around the back of the heel to give it a little bit of structure, but otherwise it's pretty floppy and there's not too much going on back there, which is something that I tend to prefer. Now, putting all of this together, this shoe comes in at a very lightweight, considering just how kind of big this shoe is. It comes in at a stated weight of 220 grams or just 7.7 ounces. Now that we talked about what this shoe is like on paper, let's talk about what this shoe is like on the roads. The Tyr Maverick was a real surprise in a very good way for me. There's a really nice cushion to this foam, and it also has a very good decompression as well. So in other words, as your foot is landing, it feels nice and soft, but as you're pushing off and trying to get into the next step, it rebounds quickly so the shoe feels nice and snappy. I use the shoe in a variety of ways. Based on the size of the shoe and the way it fits, I started off with using it as a recovery run shoe, but I also just tested it for my regular everyday runs and also for some up-tempo running as well. And I'm happy to say that the Tyr Maverick did well in all three of those instances. Now, I think that the best thing that Tyr did here was they let the foam shine on its own. I think the temptation for this shoe would have been like to put some sort of stabilizing unit in it or some sort of plate in it, either to stabilize the shoe or for marketing purposes. And they didn't do that here. It's just the foam. The foam is really good. I think the only thing that I really wouldn't want to do in this shoe is a lot of very fast running. I wouldn't want to do a lot of sprinting on the track in this shoe because at the end of the day, even though it is very light for how big it is, it still is a pretty big shoe. But for a lot of the kinds of running that I'm doing on a daily basis throughout the week, I feel like the Tyr Maverick could be a very fun option for me to take along. But what about this notion that this shoe and this foam make you more efficient of a runner, or you can go faster or run farther with less energy expenditure? Now, I can kind of look at some of the statistics that I get from my running watches, but I think comparing like what happened on one run in one day in one shoe versus one run on another day in another shoe isn't really like scientifically rigorous, and I don't really think that we need to go into an extensive analysis. At the end of the day, I don't really think that the claims that Tyr is making are all that relevant one way or the other. I think that what's really relevant for a shoe like this is whether or not the run experience is good, whether or not I enjoy running in this shoe for longer distances or at slightly faster speeds. And I think I can answer those questions without going into like a formal study in terms of making sure I'm running at the same effort under the same conditions with the same amount of rest before each run in that shoe versus say another shoe, and trying to extrapolate from an N of 1 into what could happen to the broader population. So I just don't think that it's necessary for me to go through all that, because at the end of the day, I like running in this shoe. I think it's fun, and I think they've done a very good job with the Tyr Maverick. Now, before we wrap up this video, let's take a moment to zoom out and see where the Tyr Maverick sits within the broader Tyr lineup. Now, I think the thing to remember from Tyr is that they're primarily known for two other things besides running. One is for swimming gear and apparel, and two is for weightlifting shoes. And they are excellent in each of those arenas. And I think the shoes that they've been making, they have been making shoes before any of the shoes that I'll be talking about today. But for me as a run first kind of guy, they're not really the kind of product that really appeal to me. But now they've made an entire lineup of shoes for more traditional road runners as well. So let's go over those shoes. And whenever I take a look at a brand, I always like to start with the Daily Trainer. And from Tyr, that is the Maverick that we've been talking about. Now, this is a little bit bigger than most of the Daily Trainers that I look at. And in some other brands, it might be kind of considered a long run shoe or a max cushion shoe. But I think for Tyr, this is the Daily Trainer. If I were to build a rotation around Tyr shoes, this is the one that I would select for most of my runs for most of my days. And then for days when I wanted to have a little bit of a workout, something where I wanted to go a little bit faster, then I would reach for the Valkyrie Speedworks. Now, this is a shoe using a beaded PEBA foam, and it has a plastic plate in here to help keep things stabilized. And this is a much more speed-oriented shoe that has been very fun to take for workouts. And so this would be kind of the tempo shoe, the shoe that you would take when you want to do some harder workouts than you would want to take for the Tyr Maverick. And then for your race day, Tyr has the Valkyrie Elite Carbon. And so this is also using that beaded PEBA foam in a very similar geometry as what's in the Speedworks, but it has a carbon fiber plate in it, and it's just a little bit more aggressive for those days where you want to get the most out of yourself. So these are the three models that Tyr currently offers in the performance run category. Now let's wrap up this video by going over the buying guide, and we'll also discuss some alternatives. The Tyr Maverick is a comfortable, bouncy, and versatile daily trainer that I could use for recovery runs, daily training, and for long runs as well. At $150, I feel like it's a touch more than I'd love to see this shoe priced at, but I don't think it's out of line compared to the competition. So let's see what some of those alternatives are in the marketplace. Now, the first shoe that I want to talk about is a shoe that I feel like Tyr was directly targeting when it was making the Tyr Maverick, and that comes from Saucony. That is the Endorphin trainer. This is the shoe that Tyr was targeting when they made the Maverick. But at the same time, while I feel like Tyr is kind of copying Saucony here, Tyr is really outmaneuvering Saucony in so many ways. So what Saucony tried to do with this shoe is they use a layer of their highest end foam Incredi-Run. They put a little bit of a carbon plate in here, and then on the bottom, they're stabilizing it with an EVA foam regular Power Run. And so what they're trying to do is create a shoe that is soft, but also has some responsiveness, something that you can use for everyday running, but also a little bit of faster running, maybe on a long run or for some recovery running as well. And that's kind of like the exact same thing that I would say you could use the Tyr Maverick for. But the Saucony Endorphin trainer is a much heavier shoe. And I also feel like it's a much more sluggish shoe. The Incredi-Run is a bit too mushy. It's not quite responsive enough. And at the same time, the Power Run foam, I feel like just isn't soft enough, and it just feels like it's very harsh underfoot. And so I feel like, I think I understood what Saucony was trying to do with the Endorphin trainer, but I don't think they executed it very well. I think the best execution of what Saucony was trying to do with the Endorphin trainer comes from Tyr, the Tyr Maverick. And I think the biggest error that Saucony made in making the Endorphin trainer was that they priced it at $200. And I think pretty much nobody bought it at that point because it's already discounted to a price of $150, which I feel like is a little bit more enticing. So if you want something that's a little bit more soft, a lot more stable than what you're getting in the Tyr Maverick, I'd say go with the Endorphin trainer. Otherwise, for pretty much everyone else, I'd say go with the lighter, more exciting, and better fitting Tyr Maverick. And then the other shoe that I think we should take a look at is another shoe that I think is quite overpriced in terms of what the retail pricing on it was, but I do think the experience that they're trying to deliver is similar. This shoe is from Mizuno. It is the Neo Vista version 2. Now this is another shoe that's very comfortable. They've got a knit upper, and I have a soft spot for shoes with a knit upper, especially if it's something that I'm supposed to be in for a long period of time. And I find that this shoe is very comfortable, and there's a dual layer foam that they're using in this shoe, a supercritical foam up top and then an EVA layer on the bottom, and then there is a plastic plate separating the two layers to help keep things stabilized. And I feel like this shoe is a little bit more dense of a shoe. It's not more firm necessarily, but the compression and decompression aren't quite as quick. So I feel like if you're worried about blasting through the flight time foam in the Tyr Maverick, then I would say take a look at the Neo Vista. But I think you've got to really like what the Neo Vista 2 has to offer, because that shoe comes in at a retail of $200. So those are my thoughts on the Tyr Maverick. Let me know in the comments down below if you have any other questions about this shoe or any of the shoes that I talked about today, or better yet, stop by the live streams that I do Mondays and Thursdays over on the Kofuzi Run Club channel. Love to see you guys over there in the chat. That's all I have for today, everybody. Thanks so much for making it all the way to the end of this video. Hopefully you guys are staying safe out there on your runs, and I will see you in the next one.
Yo, what's going on?